couple of months ago, I received a comment on a video from Antec UK. They claim that this case here, the Antec P20C, is a much better product with similar design elements to Corsair's 4000D. Now, are they right? Or are they completely biased? Well, fortunately for me, they were happy to ship me one of their P20C cases for me to decide. Now, I've always found Antec kind of a confusing brand when it comes to their cases. One month, they could announce something incredibly boring and ugly, and then the next month, create a really chic, modern looking case like this one or their Performance 1 FT. And this cycle has been ongoing for a few years. I feel like they've never really found their true identity or style when you compare them to the likes of NZXT or Fractal or Corsair. Those companies have found their style, focused on it, and worked on perfecting it. Now, the P20C we have here, I'm hoping for Antec's sake, is the start of that journey into creating more mature and stylistic cases, with less focus on some rather basic RGB fans and a weird abstract front panel being the focal point of the case. Honestly, just take a look at me scrolling through their website. There's so many cases that are basically the same with just a different front panel or bonus RGB fans. But that's enough about Antec's weird and wonderful past. Now let's talk about the here and now and this P20C I have behind me. Upon first inspection, it looks to be a really sleek and modern design. The gunmetal grey on the front panel and the slight hint of copper accent really make this case look like a premium piece of kit. The panels are thick and weighty, and it feels incredibly sturdy overall. The front panel is easy to remove and is held in place with some pegs and a magnet to help give you that satisfying click noise as you reattach it. Then behind it is an easy to remove dust filter to help keep those three pre-installed 120mm PWM fans nice and clean. There are several options for this chassis, and they are as follows. The P20C I have here includes three 120mm non-RGB fans and a glass side panel. The P20CE version is the same but swaps the glass for a solid side panel. There's also a P20C available in white and also a P20C ARGB, which is only available in the color I have here. There's no white RGB version, unfortunately. Though it looks like you'll actually struggle to find the RGB version nowadays, as I can't seem to find it anywhere online at the time of filming. For the Antec P20C, you're looking at paying around £95 to £105, which puts it in a tough pricing category. You're looking at £20 to £35 more than the NZXT H5 Flow or Corsair's 4000D Airflow, and similar pricing to that of a Lee & Lee Lancall 216 with its giant 160mm ARGB fans as standard. If you've made it this far into the video, you're clearly not completely offended by my face and voice, so go ahead and click that subscribe button down below. 2024 is going to be a busy year and we've got a lot more cases to review. And while you're down there, click the like button too. As always, I like to talk about the exterior of the case first, as that is where you get your first true impression when unboxing, and it's what you will spend most of your time staring at. If it looks great on the outside, you might be willing to make some compromises elsewhere. Luckily for Antec, the P20C does look great on the outside. Like I said earlier, I love the front panel and the colors they've used. The only thing I find a little bit odd is the front panel mesh uses these cool right angle triangles, and the rest of the chassis has hexagonal mesh everywhere else. The top, bottom, and rear are all hexagonal. Maybe you can have too much of a good thing and the triangle mesh would have looked a bit weird, but I feel like it was a missed opportunity for Antec to really cement their design choice. Speaking of mesh, we have a magnetic dust filter up top. At this sort of price bracket, I would prefer if it had some kind of frame around it to make it a little bit more premium, but it's just the same sort of filter you'd expect to find on cases for half this price. Fortunately, it doesn't show any of the screws from the top mounted radiator, so no horrible dents to look out for here. One positive is that the dust filter on the bottom for the PSU does have a plastic frame and it's easy to remove from the rear of the case. Front I/O is pretty much as you'd expect. We've got two USB 3.0 Type A ports, headphone and microphone ports as well, and a 10 gigabit per second Type-C 3.2 Gen 2 port. The power and reset buttons both feel very tactile and have a good click to them. No horrible squishy buttons to be had here. Both side panels are held in place with captive thumb screws, which is always appreciated. The glass panel simply slides towards the rear of the case once it's been unscrewed, then it just simply lifts off. It does look as if there's a slight tint to the glass, but I think it works well with the design, and personally I prefer it not to be too dark, which is one thing I didn't like about the Corsair 4000D, the black version of that case. The solid panel removes in the same way, though there are two little notches you will have to line up when putting the panel back on, and honestly I found this incredibly painful to line up once I'd built my system and had done what I thought at the time was a good enough job of cable management. Unfortunately, I did have to get a couple extra cable ties just to keep those cables extremely flat, just to get the side panel on. A big plus for the P20C is when you move inside though, you're greeted with a total of 8 cable grommets for routing cables through. There's even grommets at the bottom. You hardly ever see grommets down there. There's also an included GPU support holder which has a lot of adjustment, up, down, left or right. though adjusting it was a bit fiddly as the location of the screws is right in the middle of the main cable run, as well as them being incredibly over-tightened from the factory. It's a nice touch and can really help remove a lot of sag from those bigger, heavier GPUs, but if you don't like it or don't need it, you can easily just remove it completely. Another thing I'd like to point out is the fact that there's no little nubbin in the middle of the motherboard to help you align it. I mean, it's hardly a deal breaker, but I always appreciate those little nubbins when they're there.
Nubbin!
The P20C is a little taller than some other cases I've looked at recently, like the H5 Flow or 4000D. So as a result, you do get a little bit more room above the motherboard to make installing cables much easier, especially if you've got a top-mounted radiator like I have here. That extra 2 or 3 centimeters is the difference between easily plugging in your CPU power cables in a few seconds or a few minutes. Of course, you can always plug in those cables before mounting your radiator, but if you need access to your fan headers or RGB headers later down the line, then having room to physically fit your fingers in is always appreciated. That sounded wrong when I say it out loud. Anyway, speaking of fans, the 3 included 120mm fans are all PWM controlled. There is no hub or controller to connect them to, but there is an included PWM splitter in the box, which you can connect up to 4 fans simultaneously. As far as the accessories go, there isn't really much else to get excited about. It's just your basic cable ties, screws, and another Velcro tie. Nothing really too extreme here. Above where you mount the power supply, there is more of that hexagonal mesh as well as mounting holes for 2 additional fans. I personally don't think these are that beneficial in cases like this, as the airflow is generally restricted by the glass, the power supply, and the cables or hard drive cages below. But for aesthetic reasons, I can see why some people like them. More importantly though, is this little cutout for the GPU cables to poke through. I wasn't happy to see that the NZXT H5 Flow had ditched this cutout over the H510 from the previous generation, and it's one I always appreciate, as it can make your build look much cleaner. Now where the P20C really shines is compatibility, and giving the end user plenty of options. A lot of cases you generally have to choose between one option or another. Antec said, why not both? So as a result, you can install up to 2 360mm radiators in this chassis at the same time. If you don't care about radiators and you just want maximum airflow, you can always go with up to 3 140mm fans in the front, or 2 140 or 3 120mm fans up top. There's only room for a 120 fan at the rear as well as those 2 120mm fans you can install on the PSU shroud. If you populate all locations, that's up to 9 fans in total. Personally, seeing the fact that the P20C does support 3 140mm fans at the front as standard is more annoying than pleasing, because I feel that for Antec to not only be competitive and more aggressive, they should have opted for 140mm fans as standard at the front. The P20C can also support GPUs up to 375mm in length, CPU town callers up to 170mm in height, and power supplies up to 205mm with the hard drive cage installed, or 410 with that cage removed. So, what is it like to build a system in the P20C? How easy was it, and how good is the cable management? Well, the build process overall was an absolute piece of cake. There's so many grommets to route your cables, and the clean cutout at the top of the motherboard for fan cables and CPU cables makes things look incredibly neat. The included cables are all jet black, with no ugly multicolored cable for the HD audio, which is super nice to see, and something I wish all case manufacturers would do. Annoyingly, the front panel connectors weren't in a nice neat block to make life easier when plugging them in, but I can kind of forgive them for giving me a truly all black HD audio cable. Installing 2.5-inch SSDs is incredibly easy. Simply screw 4 screws into the bottom of the SSD, then just push it into place where the rubber stops are. Cable management was also pretty easy as a result of no RGB cables or hubs inside the case. I did make use of one extra Velcro tie that was found in the accessories pack to make things a little bit easier for me. There's literally cable tie points everywhere though. Everywhere. There's also tons of empty space for you to arrange your cables. Now on that point, there is tons of empty space. For a case that usually costs north of £100 in the UK, I don't want to see tons of empty space. I want a smarter solution, a cable channel or a route already in place. Out of the box, I feel like the Velcro straps are in the wrong place and probably want to move over to the right a bit to cover the grommets. You can do this if you wish. It is just something you'll probably want to do at the very beginning before you install any components. The default location to me just feels like it's here to accommodate eATX motherboards, and the 2 grommets to the left-hand side of the cable ties just feel kind of useless if you're not using an eATX motherboard. Of course, it's great to have options, but this is definitely not the most elegant solution. A lot of cases we see might have a cable bar or some clips or covers you can remove if you're in the minority of people using an eATX motherboard in a traditional, more compact mid-tower. Antec seems a bit confused here. By going between the grommets just makes the cables more pronounced and makes adjusting the GPU bracket an absolute nightmare. On Antec's product page, they actually have the cables running over the top of the grommets, which is probably the smarter way to go, even if that's not the way it comes from the factory. If it sounds like I'm being extremely nitpicky, it's because I am. There's nothing wrong here, it's super easy to work with, but it's just underwhelming, and I feel like there's some much smarter cable routing found on much more wallet-friendly cases. At the end of the day, a lot of people will argue that the build process and cable management isn't that important. It's all about looks and performance. So let's take a look at how well the Antec P20C performs under a combined CPU and GPU load. In its out-of-the-box default state, the P20C keeps our CPU well taken care of with a maximum temperature of 76.7 degrees. Removing the front dust filter behind the front panel only drops temperatures a bit to 75.6 degrees, so I've got no problems leaving that on as standard, especially when it will make cleaning so much easier in the future. Removing the top dust filter as well, considering it's not needed with an exhausting radiator, drops temperatures a little further to 74.3 degrees. But adding a 120mm exhaust to the rear does help things out even more, reducing temperatures all the way down to 72.4 degrees. So by adding one extra fan and removing the dust filter, we dropped over 4 degrees. Not too bad. But how does the GPU compare? Well, in the exact same tests, the GPU topped out at 62.2 degrees in the default state. Removing the front filter takes us to 61.3 degrees, and removing the top filter takes us to 60.7 degrees. Adding our 120mm exhaust in the rear brings us to our lowest temperature of 60.3 degrees. Now, all this either sounds terrible or great, depending on what you were expecting. But how does it stack up compared to the cases we've tested on the channel over the last few months? Well, in the default state, the P20C matches the CPU temperature of the Corsair 3000D RGB airflow, which is really solid. The Corsair 3000D includes some decent ARGB fans as standard and has a very uninterrupted front panel and layout. It's everything else that lets that case down. The P20C is comfortably ahead of the Corsair 4000D Airflow and the H5 Flow, but those cases are around £20 to £35 cheaper depending on the day, and they only include 2 fans as standard. GPU temperatures are a lot closer together, but the P20C is still outperformed by the 3000D's more open mesh and higher RPM fans. The fans in this Antec case were likely chosen more for silence than pure airflow, topping out at just 1400 RPM compared to the AR120 fans in the 3000D that can hit up to 1850 RPM. Though just as important as thermals is how they sound. Well, at the maximum RPM, they're definitely audible, but they're not annoying or drony or high-pitched. They're more of a low hum. Then at more reasonable levels like 75 or 50% fan speed, they're much more comfortable. Honestly, at 50%, so 700 to 800 RPM, I can hardly even hear them anymore. And that's not even a joke. I'll let you guys listen for yourselves. So now it's the important part, the conclusion. To buy or not to buy? That is the question I'm really struggling to answer on the P20C. Personally, I think there are better options regarding value or performance or features, but if you buy the P20C, will you be disappointed and annoyed? And ultimately, the answer is no, you won't be. You'll be very pleased. It's extremely well built, the panels are solid and sturdy, it looks premium, it's a mature and industrial style design. There's definitely a lot to like here, but for £105, it's just left me wanting more. Either more fans, bigger fans, better cable management, better dust filters on the top, a more cohesive design where the front panel actually matches the rest of the mesh on the case, maybe some more nice to haves like a hinged glass side panel or cable management covers and plates that just kind of cover up some of the cables, or even just a smart cable route just to make life easier. If Antec really wants to compete with the likes of Fantex or Lee, they need to be offering more for your money, and that is ultimately my biggest issue with the P20C. On the outside, it looks fantastic, but on the inside, there's maybe a few too many design choices or cost-cutting measures that are missing. With companies like Montec or Deepcore offering cases with plenty of mesh and 140mm ARGB fans as standard closer to £60 to £80, it's time for Antec to decide if they want to offer more premium options or more budget options, and the P20C feels like it's stuck right in the middle. The P20C's price is its biggest stumbling block. If this is priced identically to the Corsair 4000D at £75 to £85, in my opinion, it's a better buy, and I can be a lot more forgiving of its flaws. At the beginning of the video, I showed you the comment that Antec left me, saying that P20C is a much better product. It might be a better product overall, but it's by no means better value. And if you don't care for the stock fans or you already own high quality fans, then it's just too overpriced for me to make it an easy recommendation. Anyway guys, that brings us to the end of the video. What do you guys think? Have I been too harsh on the P20C, or do you think I've hit the nail on the head? It's a great case, but just a little bit too expensive. Let me know down in the comment section below if you've enjoyed this video. Make sure you give it a like, and if my face hasn't offended you, don't forget to get subscribed. If you're interested in checking out the Antec P20C or any extras I may have mentioned, make sure to check the description for my affiliate links down below. I'll catch you in the next one, guys. Cheers.